welcome, Tony. Thanks so much for coming down. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Really good to get you on the show and hear your story.
Thank you.
Been seeing you quite a bit over the years in Brighton, different meetings and stuff, and thought it was nice. I also know you've got a little book coming out soon, so we've got plenty to chat about.
Yes, that's good timing. Isn't it?
It is. It was, well, it's almost like meant to be, right?
Yes.
How did it all start for you then, your journey?
So my journey, I'm one of six.
Yeah.
Grew up so I've got five. There's five of us boys.
Wow.
And my younger sister.
Yeah.
We grew up in Moulsecoombe.
Okay.
And tough dad. You know,
Was he the traditional dad of the family? Yeah.
Yeah, he's sort of quite a presence, my dad. And then my older brothers, and I'm sort of three older than me.
So you're right in the middle, kind of.
Yes.
A bit. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And and he sort of he was tough, and he wanted us to be tough. And he, from a young age, he used to take us boxing, and karate, and all that kind of stuff, judo, and all that, you know. And when my brothers loved it, my brother went. One of my brothers went on to become a pro boxer, really good pro boxer.
Huh.
And my dad got my cousin who used to live with us, Chris. He got him into karate at a very young age, and he absolutely loved that. And he made his life.
Wow.
Still does it to this day.
Fantastic.
Runs a club for 50 years.
Jeez.
So he's a black belt. God knows how many down.
Did you get into the?
So I'd done it, but I didn't really like it. I wasn't like my brothers. They were. It's like they had so much bottle. They had so much. They were like the toughest in their class, and they were. But I wasn't really into fighting. I wasn't really.
You're a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah. So it's and my dad could see that I was a bit different, a bit more of a dreamer. And he when he used to take us out, he used to take us up to Stammer Park every week.
Yeah.
And I would be lagging behind or something. Come on, Tone. No, come on, lads. Yeah. And you, Tone.
Right. Cheers,
so it was. I think you could see I was a bit different from the others. Yeah. And it was just, I was a bit more of a dreamer, and whereas they didn't seem to have any fear in them. From a very early age, I seem to have. I seem to be full of it.
Yeah.
And so I'd hold back. I wouldn't put myself forward.
Yeah.
As much as they did.
A bit shy, maybe.
A bit shy, a bit timid.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. So
I was the same. Yeah.
So that's how that's how I sort of grew up. And and over time, that fear started to grow in me.
Okay. Yeah.
And at about 11 years old, I sort of became acutely aware of myself.
Like very self-conscious.
Really self-conscious. If anyone looked at me, I'd couldn't hold a gaze, couldn't, my head down, felt really embarrassed when anyone sort of looked at me, I'd just turn red and all that kind of stuff. And, so that wasn't good, and I felt embarrassed of myself.
Yeah.
And I picked up ideas around that age that I wasn't as good as my brothers. I wasn't.
It's a tough age to go through.
Yeah, it
especially if you feel a bit different.
Yes. Yeah. And so that all started going on around sort of 11 years old. And sort of 12, 13, my mum and dad split up. My mum left the house. And she left us on her own with my dad.
Oh, wow.
And, down to my dad. Yeah. He was a bit of a character. And
wow.
So, and then my dad went to my girlfriends, or to his girlfriends at the time. And so we was 5 boys left in a house to look after ourselves, look after each other.
That's tough.
you know.
Really tough, isn't it?
Yeah, so we, you know, and being that age, and we was all sort of turning into scallywags by that time. Yeah. We started getting up to all kinds of mischief, and it was tough, you know. And in that time, I sort of, from there, all the fear, you know, developed in me, and then I started to go into depressions and sort of these real black depressions and stuff like that, you know. So that's how I started sort of growing up, you know. And then 13 years old, I can still remember making it a conscious decision to, I wanted to be a crook.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to, you know, be in like a conventional sense. My dad was a crook. My older brothers were sort of going that way. All the people on the estate we knew were sort of into that. And so I made that. And I remember making it at 13 years old.
So that's my career path.
Yeah.
That's it for me.
That's it, you know.
Yeah.
And
stuff school and being conventional.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, and
interesting.
Yeah, you know, if we wanted something, just go out and take it. You know, and that resulted in my first prison sentence at 14.
Jeez, so, quite young. Is that what they call Borstal back then?
Detention centre.
Detention,
yeah. So 3 months in a detention centre.
Wow.
That was a short, sharp shock. Yeah. They called it back then.
All university.
Yes, and it was for you know, for people like us back then.
Yeah.
You know, on the estate, and you're sort of 14 coming in, and you've just, you know, you come out of school, you've been taken out of school, you've been sent to thing. You go back to school and you think you're
the nuts. Done time, mate.
Yeah, you know. So I was, you know, and when I got back to school after that, I sort of got it in my head that, you know, if you was naughty or you chatted them back or whatever, you know, what can they do?
Yeah. Worse, you know,
you know, you send you to detention or something like that, and you can refuse that, you know. So
miss a day.
So they can't give you a good kick in and you know, take you down and set, you know, like put you in the block and give you more days and stuff like that. So with that in my head, I was terrible.
Really? It's hard to imagine that, Tony, because you're so chilled and together. I can't imagine you being a scallywag. One of my
biggest regrets. You know, is the way I treated the teachers back then. You know, it was terrible. But that's, you know, and again at that age, trying to fit yourself into this life I'd sort of, you know, was going into. You know, me and a friend of mine, I think it was about 13 or 14, got some Indian ink. Yeah. You know, a needle.
Oh, right.
And a matchstick.
Yeah.
and drawing all like,
you know, tattoo.
Sort of, you know, it's one. A terrible mum there, you know, crosses, and you know, so didn't have any imagination or anything else, you know.
I'm going to just stick man.
Just hold you around that, you know, and thinking that it was like really cool and really tough, you know. I couldn't wait to get to school, you know, and so that was, you know, think back to the decisions you make when you're.
Interesting, man.
You know, when you're that age and you're trying to fit yourself in to, you know, to the life you found yourself in, or the life you're choosing, you know.
You don't know, at that age, you don't really know, do you?
No.
You don't know right from wrong.
No.
You just
and we weren't taught right from wrong.
Yeah.
You know, we sort of come from a, you know, sort of quite a dysfunctional. My dad didn't sort of know right from wrong. He was a sort of crook and, you know, lived that kind of way. So we weren't taught that way, you know. But, so that was, and then from there, so 15, I, you know, we were just sort of getting up to all kinds of mischief and everything else. And I met a woman who used to live across the road. I knew her sons, and I started an affair with her. Oh, wow. And she was 38, I was 15.
Wow.
So,
wow. You lucky sod. I mean, that's disgusting. That's terrible.
Terrible.
That never happened to me.
Yeah, and you know, and then we eloped to London.
Gosh.
And we was living in a squat up there.
Wow.
Well, squats all over London.
Yeah.
So that was quite.
So you must have been quite a big lad at 15.
Yeah, I was.
Didn't look
so
like
I was 6 foot.
Yeah.
So I was 6'1".
Wow.
At
Okay.
15. So I was 13, I get into a pub.
Jeez. Wow.
You know? And so, so
and it must have been quite an exciting life.
Yes,
You're thinking, my mates are at school and I'm with this bird in a squat.
Yes.
Wow. I can see how it could be quite alluring.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, but I hadn't touched drugs or anything then.
Yeah.
Drugs hadn't come into it then. And anyway, I split out of her when I was 17. I came back to Brighton. And, and then it went from there, 18 years old. I'd met, in the time I came back to my 18th birthday, actually, I met the girl that was going to become my wife.
Oh, wow.
And, and then on my 18th birthday, my brother, he just bought a gram of speed. Yeah. And, and he gave me half for my birthday.
Wow. Yeah.
And I snorted this speed. And, I'll never forget the effect I had from that drug. Yeah. You know, it was like someone turned the gas on inside of me. You know, just everything.
Afterburners on full.
Yeah, everything in me lit up. Yeah. You know, my head was tingling. Everything in me just came alive. You know, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I went down to town that night and met my girlfriend and chatted her, talked her ears off for a while, and then she had to go. And then I was left down the town on my own. And normally I was full of fear. Yeah. And I tell a story, and it sort of shows what drugs really done for me. You know, at the age of 14, my brothers and I were going to a club. First time at a disco. You're 14 and you're all revved up, and and I used to love music. I used to love, in the mirror at home, I'd sort of, get the airbrush out and think I was some kind of pop star, And so I loved all that, and we're in there, super excited, and we get to the doors of the club, the Top Rank Suite it was down there.
Yeah, the event now.
Yeah. And and it was student night or something like that. And so we get to that, put our coats away and get in there, and it's banging, there's all the music's blaring and it's great, and I get near the dance floor, and everything in me just wants to get on that dance floor and, just do my thing, and let go and stuff, and all of a sudden, just as I'm about to get onto the dance floor, it's like my mind started to, whoa, don't go on there.
People will look at you.
People are going to look at you. You're going to make a fool of yourself. You're going to thing. And I stood there with that going on in me for God knows how long, and I couldn't get myself onto the thing. I couldn't, and I was buying all the lines, hook, line, and sinker. And, and after a while, I sort of slinked back, sat on a chair,
feeling defeated.
And I remember walking home that night, and and feeling so,
down on yourself.
Down, and it's like I had a spirit in me, an energy in me that wanted to live. And a mind and all this fear in my body that didn't let it, that wouldn't let it, Anyway, fast forward to when I was 18, that my 18th birthday that night, and I'd had this drug, and I was feeling alive and
must have been an amazing feeling after years of repressing yourself to suddenly feel
no fear,
I'm cool.
No, you just felt a lot, and confidence. Then I was walking down the seafront, and I didn't want to go home yet, so full of energy, and walking down the seafront, and there was a club called the Hungry Years on the seafront.
Oh yeah,
remember the old heavy metal club?
Proper rockers club.
And I wasn't into that at the time. Never listened to it really. I had sort of shorter hair and that. And I remember going past that club. Looks fantastic.
Yeah.
you know, and then just going past it, and all of a sudden I just went straight in there.
Wow.
Straight in there, straight into the middle of the dance floor.
In a rocker's place, yeah.
And started headbanging.
You're like, yeah.
Along with the rest of them.
And were you surprised? Were you thinking, I can't believe I'm doing this?
Well, I just you know, I had no fear, no inhibition, no nothing.
Wow.
You know, and that's what drugs done to me.
Yeah.
You know, that's the effect.
Wow.
That first drug had on me. You know, and I absolutely loved it.
Jeez.
And from that time, you know, it was like I was always going to take it again. You know, it was like I'd found my answer that night. I'd found my solution.
Wow. That's a pivotal moment in your life.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. You know, and that was it. And from there, you know, I'd done it every chance I could. And it grew and it grew.
Starts off being weekends, I guess. And
yes.
Then once in midweek, and before you know it.
Yes, you know, and you know, and it did. It helped me for a while. You know, it took me out of myself. It brought me out of myself. You know, it allowed me to live. And we was getting up to all kinds of.
How did your family react? You know, did they know that you'd found your new freedom?
No. Because I think everyone was at it.
Oh, right.
Back
Okay.
then.
You weren't the only one.
No.
Oh, okay.
So it was, you know, as everyone.
Yeah.
Everyone was at it, and everyone was experimenting, and, you know. But
jeez.
Yeah. So it's fantastic, you know. And it from there, it developed in me. I started taking other drugs, you know, and it just helped me to live. And it very soon became. I was taking a bit every day.
Yeah.
You know.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very
heavy, or just like little things to keep you going.
Not heavy.
Yeah.
Just a bit every day, just to sort of face the day or whatever. You know.
I can see how that could become so habit for me.
Oh, really was. You know, you know, and I was so I was going into sort of villainy then, and it really helped with that. You know, because you had all the fear in you, and it took away the fear for a while and stuff like that. You know, sort of helped you do these things, and so it really helped with that. You know, and it just helped me sort of get into life. It it really brought me into life. Yeah, you know, and. Yeah, my wife and I, we ended up getting married when I was 20.
Wow, nice.
And getting all the stuff. Then my first daughter, was born on my, just the day after my 21st birthday.
Nice.
You know, and you know, and then after a few years, the sort of cracks started to appear.
Yeah,
I was out more and more. You know, life was quite fast back then, and I was out in the clubs and pubs most nights.
Home life was like boring.
Yes, you know, and didn't want to miss out. Didn't want to, you know, didn't want to miss out anything. So, and you started using ecstasy and cocaine. And
did you have good times on that?
Brilliant.
I've never heard anyone go, "That was shit, mate."
I remember my first ecstasy.
Doves and all that. Back in the day,
I didn't know what hit me. Yeah. I literally didn't know what hit me down in the club in Southampton. It was funny. It was. I just took it. We booked in a hotel for the night, and I took it in the hotel, and they was coming into the club. And luckily, my friend with me, he knew the bouncers and everything. Because I walked into the club, and as I started walking to the club, I started coming up.
Fuck.
And I was like, whoa!
Yeah, that bass kick.
It was just like, you know, when you can't contain yourself, and anyway, he sort of got me past the bouncers on the door, and they were all looking at me like, you know, and then when you went up into the club and you heard the music, and it's, you know, you just let yourself
it's a
go.
spiritual experience.
It really is.
It really is.
It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah, it was fantastic. But I only ever had that experience once. Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
But I took them lots of times, but I didn't. That kind of experience. Yeah. That was, I only ever had that once. But yeah, you know, so experimenting with a lot of drugs by then, and you know, and the crack started to appear. Yeah, you know, and during that time, I had an affair with a woman, and instantly realised it was wrong. You know, didn't want it, and called it off anyway. I came clean and told my wife. She was devastated, you know. And I left the family home, you know. And in that time, then she met someone, you know. And all that jealousy and insecurity in me came up, you know. And it was an awful time, you know. And then I started to use drugs more and more, you know.
Did they become like your refuge almost?
Yes, you know, really to try and get me through those times. And you know, I full of fear and everything else, I you know, I sort of bullied my way back into a life, really. And, you know, knowing that it shouldn't have been, you know, it's finished, it was done, but couldn't let it go. And we ended up getting back together, you know, and over the years we had another 5 kids.
5? Wow!
So we had 6 kids altogether.
Jeez.
And we went on for 36 years.
Wow, that's impressive, mate.
You know, but it was, it shouldn't have gone on for 36 years. From that time then, you know, it shouldn't have gone on for 36 years. And it was, we were at each other all the time, and you know, and we, you know, sort of mainly for the kids, and mainly out of fear of not, you know, of not having her.
Yeah.
You know, but so you know, time rolled on.
Interesting life.
Yeah,
and we're not even halfway through it.
It's
brilliant. Sorry, it's not brilliant. It's your life, mate.
Yeah.
But, I love your honesty. Thanks, Tony, for sharing this stuff.
No, it's
But
my pleasure. Yeah, it's anyway. So that's you know, more kids were born.
How many have you got?
So I got 6.
Okay, yeah.
So we got 6. Jeez. You know, and then, so in my sort of up to my 20s, I had you know, I was in and out of prison quite a bit. And then from my 20 to when I was 30, I had a sort of 10-year prison-free run. You know, just I didn't get caught for much.
Yeah.
And, you know. You
weren't just being good, you just were lucky.
Yeah, yes. You know, and had a 10-year prison-free run. And then age 30, got nicked for something and found myself in prison. First time in 10 years. And anyway, in the cell one day reading, and in comes my cellmate, and he's got a little bag of brown gear, brown powder, you know. Never seen it before. Didn't know what it was, you know.
Yeah.
Done all the other drugs, but not that one. That was the dirty one.
Yeah,
that was the.
That's what druggies do.
Yeah, that's, you know, that's they're the real junkies.
Yeah.
So, you know, and we didn't know how to do it. We didn't have any foil or anything like that. You know, so we just had this blob of brown powder, and we just both put a lighter under it, and we both just stood over it. Yeah. And trying to get the bit of smoke.
Yeah.
And it just went up in a puff of smoke.
Oh, shit.
And, you know, and we just thought...
What's that all about?
What's that, you know, what's that all about? And so, you know, didn't think much of it. And then later on in that sentence, well, I was on remand, actually, but later on that time, I went into a friend of mine's cell, and, you know, he was a proper gear.
That's it, yeah.
And he had the foil and he knew how to run it, you know. And you know, and he ran it for me, and just like that first time on the speed, it quite really done something for me, you know. And remember, I was missing my kids, I was missing my wife, I was in prison, you know, and this bit of gear, it just completely took me out of myself. It's just like everything sort of melted away.
Chilled.
All my worries and all my fears and everything else, you know. And it just took me out of myself for a bit. It's like having a day off from yourself.
Yeah.
You know, and my sort of thoughts and my, you know, the conflict going on in me, you know. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it, you know. And again, like the speed back then, you know, was always going to take that drug again. Yeah. You know, it had a big effect on me.
Wow.
You know, And I did every chance I got. And came out of that with a bit of remand. Went back in a little while later, 6 months later or something like that, and I got a 3-year sentence for something else. And in there, done it as often as I could. You know, and
does it help people get through their sentence?
Yes. So in there, back in that time, it had just started. It's like an explosion in the jails.
Wow,
that's how it started. That's how the sort of heroin epidemic started. Because I used to smoke weed in there. All the time, and yet, but the weed would stay in your. So they introduced testing.
Oh right.
In those times, 90s, middle of 90s, they introduced the test. And so, whereas the weed would stay in your system for 30 days, a bit of gear you could get rid of it in a day.
Oh right, I didn't realise that.
Yeah, so everyone just turned over to the gear.
Oh right, yeah.
You know, so all these people, you know, and they just went on the gear. You know, and that's how it started. And so you know, so I loved it, and you know, and I started to get into it. And when I got out, you know, I sort of went back to it, found it.
Were you addicted by then?
Yeah, I wasn't. I didn't have a habit.
Yeah,
but I was pretty seasoned.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have a full-on habit. It didn't take me long to get one.
Yeah. When you're out,
You know, and I sort of I fell in with a group of like real, you know, sort of real addicts. You know, these lot have been at it for a while.
Yeah, and need it daily.
Yeah, you know, and it was like they were up against the clock.
Yeah. Oh, really?
You know, so you're literally when you're on that gear and you're you're banging it up as well. Is you're literally up against the clock. You've got hours until you're going to start rattling again, you know, and so you have to do anything you can to get what you can, you know, in that time.
Wow.
You know, and that's
a horrible way to live, isn't it?
It's awful. It really is.
Because the morals go out the window.
There's everything.
There's a bag, grab it, snatch it. It's a purse, I need it.
Yeah, you know, you don't care. God. You don't care, you know. And I started getting in with it. You know, and they're a different bunch. You know, I'd always been used to the people on the speed and the coke and the ease, you know, and that's a sort of loved up group, isn't it? You know, and the sort of people are sharing, they're happy to share, you know.
Have a couple of these.
You know, but this lot, these the heroin addicts, they're not like that.
Because they need this stuff, don't they?
Everything's each to their own, you know, and they hold it tight and there's no sharing and they'll rip yours off. And, you know, so it's a different ball game. It's a completely different ball game, you know. And that's, you know, I started to get into that, and I went down so quickly, so quickly.
Jeez.
You know, and before long, I stuck my arm out. Loved it.
Wow.
You know,
that must be scary. The first time you do that,
it is.
Must be scary.
Yeah. But you're sort of you're getting
crossing
into
the line from
you're crossing, you know,
recreational to serious.
Yes, you know, you put and then it's you know, the buzz is better. The effect is better, you know. It's quicker and it's just better.
Cleaner, probably.
But it's it sort of it wears off a lot quicker as well.
Right. Oh, right. Okay.
So you really are up against the clock then. You know. So and then through that I developed a raging needle fixation. So even the other addicts thought I had a problem.
Really, you just loved it.
I just you know, talk about obsessive.
Yeah.
It's just where they do theirs in one hit and get the full effect, you know. I'll sort of separate mine into 4 or 5 and I'd be looking for veins, you know, and literally in the, you know, the last sort of years of my using, that's all I'd do. You know, it would just be money to get the gear. Yeah. You know, get the gear and then spend the rest of the day looking, you know, or hours looking.
I suppose it starts to get hard to find places, does it?
Yeah,
jeez.
Really bad. Yeah. My veins crashed really quickly, and it does. You know, you can sort of be looking for a vein for 2 hours or something. God. You know, you've got to have all the heat on and everything else, and you know, it's a
That's
real.
Not a fun. Doesn't sound fun.
No, it's not.
Yeah, the fun's gone. There's no fun.
There's no fun in it.
Yeah.
You know, but and that's what, you know. And you're doing, you know, you're getting more and more desperate, and everyone's seeing it. You know, your family.
You can't hide it.
No, you
when
can't.
It gets like that.
And that's the thing with heroin. It's one of them drugs that you can't hide.
Yeah.
You know, other drugs you can hide pretty well, can't you? You know, but heroin, because everything numbs in you.
You're right.
You know, and your eyes are drooping, and your face
slowly,
is drooping, and your head's nodding.
You get
and,
skinny.
Yeah, you know, it's, you
Don't
know,
eat.
so you don't. Everyone notices, and especially when you start injecting. You know, your you know, your veins are crashing, and your bruises everywhere, and abscesses, and you know, all that kind of stuff. So it's a it's a terrible.
That sounds like it was quite a tough period.
Yes, it really was. Yeah, that period from 30 to 40, so I had a 10-year sort of period. That was probably the worst period. You know, it was just it was quite a quick descent when it started.
Yeah,
you know, and then it was just like you sort of hit the ground. You know. And you're just going along the ground.
It's just skidding on your face.
Yeah, you're just, you know, you're just on the floor.
Yeah.
You're on the floor of life.
Fuck.
And you're just going on the floor of life. You're just going along, you know, nothing gets better, nothing gets...
It must be awful for your family and your kids.
You know, it is.
Got
you
6
know,
kids, they're saying, well, how's Dad? Haven't seen him. God, that
Yes.
must be horrible. And then you feel that.
Yes.
For them,
So all that, yes.
Yeah,
really,
and then you probably ends up making you want to use more, right?
Yes, yeah.
Bury yourself deeper. Oh.
And that was, you know, one of my... I remember one of my daughters, you know, when I was in prison at the time, and she was such a happy-go-lucky girl, you know. She was really full of life, full of beans, and you know, absolutely adored me, and I adored her. And I remember I went to jail, you know, and I remember she came up on a visit, you know, and it's like she changed, you know, and she's sort of gone inwards and thing, you know, and her mum said she's been looking out the window every day for you and all this, you know, so it's really, you know, when you, you know, that has a big effect on you inside.
Oh, yeah.
You know, your soul, if you like.
How did you make peace with that feeling?
It took years. Took years.
Did you have to actively work on it?
Yes. Yeah.
Because that can drag you back out.
Yes.
That kind of.
Yeah, it's all those things that keep you in it, really, I think.
Yeah.
You know, when you're in it.
Yeah, true.
Because you don't want to face them.
No.
You know, you don't want to face them. And that was, you know, so yeah. So I had a 10-year period like that where it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And then when it was just near my 40th birthday. And I just conked out. I just literally, I had a brother, and he was only one of my brothers, really. He was a born-again Christian. You know, he'd had some issues with himself and in his early life. Bless me. And he walked into a church, and he had a conversion.
Wow. Did it help him?
Well, in some ways it did.
Yeah.
And his mind not being too great, in some ways it didn't. You know, all the hell and damnation stuff and everything else played on his mind. And I think it made him a bit worse, if anything. But, you know, but there was other parts of him that it did help, you know. And so, you know, his efforts to be a good Christian and all that, he was like my refuge.
Yeah.
I could go there anytime.
Non-judgmental.
And I could stay there, and he'd let me stay.
Oh.
You know, I used to have his hallway. He used to have a little bed place, and I used to have his hallway. And I used to sleep in his hallway. And, you know,
But he'd done you a solid when you needed it.
But he was, you know, he was fantastic. But the only sort of drawback was, you know, he was always trying to convert me.
That's the downside. Yeah.
You know, but I didn't sort of,
I
I didn't mind too much. You know, and I even quite enjoyed listening to some of them. So and that was it. Just my gut state, I'd sort of, you know. And I'd often think, you know, if I had his faith.
Yeah. Faith is a powerful thing, isn't it?
You know, yeah.
Really
I mean, I've come to learn that
later.
But at the time, you know, I think if I had his faith, you know, I might be able to get out of this.
You would have had the strength. Yeah.
But I couldn't sort of get his brand.
Yeah.
You know, his sort of particular...
It wasn't palatable for you.
Yeah, his sort of particular brand. You know, it just didn't...
I haven't heard it put that way. That's a really good analogy.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah. It didn't make sense to me, and I couldn't sort of come. I couldn't, you know, for the life of me, I just sort of couldn't get to grips with it. You know, and anyway, it was just short of my 40th birthday, and I just ran out of steam. It's like I literally just ran out of steam, everything in me just ran out of steam. And I went to his house, and it was like I just wanted to just lay down somewhere, and I don't know if I wanted to die, but I wanted to just switch off.
Yeah, just like
just switch off, because you
get off the Ferris wheel for a bit.
Yeah, and it's just and I laid there, and I just didn't get up, and 3 days went past. Shit. Normally I'd be up and out trying to, it was on me. 3 days went past, and I remember being there that night, and I was it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. And I was sitting in the chair, and I was just thinking, sort of my mind was really doing a number on me, and I was just thinking, this is useless, this is absolutely pointless. As soon as you're able to, the thought's going to come back in. You're not going to be able to fight it. Yeah. It always wins. It always gets louder, and it's hopeless. Yeah. What's the point? And all of a sudden, it was just like something came into me. That's the only way I can describe it. Something
a
came into
spiritual
me,
experience,
and
almost.
I jumped up off the chair.
Wow.
Literally jumped off of the chair. Hell, what was that? And it was like something had come in, and it's such a force, such a power. And this other thing couldn't be with it, couldn't stand with it. Yeah, yeah. And it was like,
it was more powerful than the other.
It was more powerful than that, And and it's just like something had happened inside. Wow. Yeah. And it was like I felt brand new inside, And I couldn't stop laughing. I couldn't stop smiling. Wow. There was no thoughts. There was no, there's no
cravings.
No cravings. There was no thing. It was just like
Were you puzzled? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, really puzzled. But I wasn't complaining.
Grateful. Yeah.
I wasn't complaining. Yeah. But it was, and I still clucked. It took me 10 days no sleep.
Wow. That's tough.
And on the 10th day, on the 11th day actually, I got a bit of sleep, and but it didn't matter. I was laughing. I was being sick. I was throwing up. I was being, and all that. But I just felt terrific inside, like
and some hope, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. It was like something. I felt like brand new inside.
Wow.
And and on the 11th day, something my mum said years before, about sort of not being able to do it on your own, and so I got the number of a helpline. Yeah. And I phoned up a helpline. They said there's a meeting.
One,
yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So a fellowship helpline. Yeah. And phoned them up. They said there's a meeting on a Tuesday night by Blockbusters or something. It was.
On London Road?
Yeah. I went there, and I started. That's the first time I walked into a meeting, and there's all these people talking about all this stuff, and I didn't know any addicts who wanted to get clean.
Yeah. How did it feel when you went there for the first time? Do you think this is going to be a bit weird?
Yeah, it's a bit, it's a bit strange. But they started talking about, spiritual experience. The literature and spiritual experience, spiritual awakening, and I was thinking, well, something like that must have happened to me.
Yeah. And identified with that.
Yeah, and so I started identifying with them, and their honesty was, they were talking in meetings, and their honesty, they were just so honest. Yeah. And I wasn't used to that.
Yeah.
I come from a criminal sort of background, and we used to lie and cheating and stuff, So the honesty was sort of
very refreshing, I guess. Yeah.
And so many strange things happened at that time. For the first time as well, I developed a conscience.
Wow.
I do. I seem to have. I don't know why, but from a very early age, I seem to have bypassed my conscience. And I sort of go out and I steal this and I do that and whatever, and I didn't really give a second thought. And all of a sudden now, I've got this conscience.
Wow.
I couldn't steal anything. Yeah. I couldn't lie. Yeah. I couldn't cheat.
Yeah.
Wow. And it was like, I just had this, and it was a strange time. And, it's like all the colours. It was just coming into spring then, and all the colours, they seemed, the blues seemed bluer, and the greens seemed greener. And I remember going down to town one day, and it was a sort of tree. It was a tree, and it was coming into bloom.
Wow.
And I remember being absolutely mesmerised by this tree. And it was like it was pulsating and shimmering, and it was like, it's fantastic time. It was like, it was like a drug, where the effects were,
It's like a clean eye.
Yeah. And I loved everyone, loved everything, couldn't stop laughing. I had to go to the doctors, over the course of like 6 months. I had to visit the doctors twice for straining my stomach muscles where I was laughing so much.
Really? Wow.
Whereas, then belly laughs and stuff like that.
And you probably hadn't laughed genuinely for years, right?
You didn't laugh. Wow. So that was, and then, and I kept going to the meetings, and I got a sponsor, and he started taking me through the steps, and we got to step 3. And turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understand God. And I started to trip up.
Yeah.
I didn't.
It's that God word, isn't it?
The God word.
Yeah.
And it still brought up all that stuff in me, and I sort of, they were saying, well, it's a God of your understanding and all that, but I sort of couldn't compute,
Because it puts a lot of people off the God word.
Yeah. You'd do so much better if you didn't mention it.
Yeah.
But that's what I thought at the time anyway. And I started to, and I associated with that with Happy Brigade and
Sundays and
Sunday school
stuff,
and Kumbaya and all that kind of stuff. And from the life I'd come from, it was just too big a leap.
Total opposites.
It was just too big a leap. And I started to pull back, and I didn't want to turn my will and my life over to care of, this thing.
This God geezer.
Yeah. Yes, not with that. And I had resentments towards it for, I had a very distorted view of it. 1 minute I'd blame it for all my troubles and the world's troubles.
Yeah.
And then next I didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
So I had a very distorted view, and so I pulled back. And as I started to pull back, the old feelings started to come back.
Oh dear. Because you were disconnecting.
Yes, I was disconnecting.
So,
Yes, and the old feelings started to come back, and conflict started to come up in me again, and I got involved in a bit of dishonesty, and I still had this conscience.
Yeah.
And where I'd sort of done this bit of dishonesty, I'm full of shame now, full of guilt, full of this. Then it turns to anger. And then all of a sudden I'm so conflicted inside.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I know is to use.
Yeah.
To get to. So, and I remember going there that night, and
you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to be doing this.
I don't want to be doing it, but that's the only option now.
Yeah.
You're so well. I was so conflicted inside that it felt like it was the only option. And I remember taking this bit of gear this night, and it didn't stop it.
It didn't.
It didn't.
So
stop
it didn't work.
It didn't work.
Wow. So this thing was almost so powerful.
Yes.
That you were immune to it.
It was, and I was. It didn't stop it.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh God, what have I done? I've sort of crossed the line again.
Yeah.
I'd set myself off. It was like I set a beast out of the cage that night. And I didn't want to go back in any time soon. And then I spent the next 4 years.
Oh, that's hard. That's
a
horrible place to be when there is recovery.
And I was trying to come back in and out, for a while anyway.
Yeah.
Because I'd had it and I'd seen it and I knew it was there.
You knew it was there,
But it wasn't that. It was the obsession in me was so strong. The cravings in me were so strong. And it was having none of it.
And were you seeing people from the room saying, "All
yes.
right,
yes,
you're coming back soon, mate"?
Yes, and you can't, and as nice as that is for them to do that,
It's a horrible feeling for you.
Yeah, it's you know,
because you see them all happy and clean.
Yes,
and come on up and have a cup of tea.
And you're not.
Like, no,
and
thanks.
you're you're right.
Yeah.
And that was awful. And so that went on for another 4 years.
Shit.
And again getting worse, the using getting worse. And then it came to a head. Well, I was in my so I knew about all this stuff. I knew about praying. I knew about asking for help and all that, you know. And about 6 months before I came in this time, I was in my brother's bathroom, my brother's toilet, and got up there, you know, and feeling rough, and you know, went into his toilet and I prayed. I got down on my knees and I prayed, you know, please help me today, stay clean. And while I was down there, it's like I had a little sort of out of body experience.
Wow.
And I sort of saw myself.
Yeah.
You know, and I was thinking, that's not truthful.
Yeah.
That's not honest. You know. And it's like everything in me wanted to use. You know. And anyone was asking God or whatever, you know, for help. Don't let me use today, please, you know. And yet if it had stopped me from using that day, I'd have been livid. Yeah. Because everything in me wanted to use.
Yeah. So you're in a lose-lose situation.
Yeah, so it was a real, you know, it's just like, it was like paying lip service.
Yeah.
You know, and from that night, I sort of, or from that day rather, that morning, I sort of saw that I was going about it the wrong way. And that,
Excuse me.
What I was really needed to ask for was the willingness to actually want to stop, you know, and the willingness to actually go to any lengths to stay stopped, you know. And so I started, in my prayers then, I started getting specific. I started asking specific, you know, and for the obsession to be removed. I know I couldn't do anything. All the time I had that obsession. Yeah. You know.
Once that's on you, it's too late.
It's just
it's
too
like
late.
Against the tide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to
have
no. Yeah, you know, and so I knew, you know, so I started asking for the obsession to be removed, and I started asking for the willingness to go to any lengths, to do anything, you know, not only to get clean, but to stay clean, you know, for good and all. Yeah. And so you know, I got really specific, and nothing happened for a while, you know, but I kept asking, and 6 months later, it got really bad, and I think it brought me to a point where everything in me started to change, and I got really bad. Where I was using, the way I was using, I was skin popping up in my arm here, and it got infected, and it got really. I was trying to do it myself, and it got really badly infected. And it was sort of 2 or 3 times the size of it should be, and it was you know, it was all sorts of exotic colours and whatever. And then at the same time, my left leg below my knee, my leg had gone black, and it was full of open sores and abscesses and whatnot. And you know, I was in a
bad shape.
Yeah, bad shape. Yeah. And anyway, I was with a couple of my mates this day, and they noticed I was getting a bit delirious, and they took me up to the hospital. The hospital sort of seeing me. Within minutes, I was straight up in a surgery, and they couldn't muck about trying to get a vein and all that kind of stuff, so they just knocked me out with the gas and air. Yeah. And I woke up and I had a tube coming out of my neck to like a trolley thing with stuff going into my heart, that through my neck down into my heart, pumping stuff into my heart every 2 hours. So.
You must have bad blood poisoning.
Yeah, so it's blood poisoning, sepsis.
Sepsis.
And
and
and that was, and even then, I come out of the, you know, I come out of the operation. They'd done stuff in my arm, and they was putting the stuff into my heart, and I came out of the operation, and a few hours after I was, you know, out, and I sort of got my senses back, grabbed my trolley, put a coat on, and just across the road down the road from me, there was my mate used to.
Fucking hell! So, you took your you dripped down, go and
so
score.
This November night, really late November night, pouring with rain, and just got my coat on, had my gown on still, and pushing my trolley, and turned up at his flat, and he sort of opened the door, he nearly had a heart attack. He was just sort of, God, what are you doing, And anyway, his was like the local shooting gallery down there, and anyway, we stood on the corner of his place for an hour in the rain, waiting for the dealer to come. You know what they're like, and
wow,
got back and having a hit, and I was, because I had this thing in me. I thought, I might as well just whack it in that.
Straight in.
Straight
into the heart.
And I was trying to fiddling with the top for this thing, trying to get the thing off. And there was a fella, and I'd never seen him before. This was, talk about angels. I'd never seen him before. And he was in the sort of corner, he was all gouged out, and he was, and all of a sudden I was trying to get this fella, and he's gone, no. And he'd been in a squat or somewhere a few months before. He'd seen someone do that, and they went straight over, died. So straight into the heart. You wouldn't. I would never survive that.
Jesus.
And
you had some close calls there, mate. So that must have been. Oh man.
Yeah. So got back to the hospital, and that night, and while I was there, I started to come down a bit, and sort of see the gravity of my situation, And in the ward there was 3 of us, and one had already lost his leg. One was about to lose his leg, and there was me. I was, sort of similar.
Your leg was black,
yeah. And the next step is to lose it. And I was just thinking, God, I don't want to go on like this. I don't want to be, like losing your leg is. Like worse than death, or it was to me, And then you got to be pushed around in a wheelchair, and I was already such a burden to my family, and it was just like, and I went into a real sort of black depression, and I remember this nurse, I was there, and I sort of, really down one day, a nun.
Oh wow!
Came into my room, and. She said, can I pray for you? She's a little Irish lady. Can I pray for you? And I sort of let out a little laugh, And I said, I have been praying, but I don't think he's listening to me, And she gave me a little wink, and she said, he's always listening.
Wow.
And she had a, she said a prayer for me, and she gave me a little rosary.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. And then a couple of weeks after that, the doctor who operated on me, I was sort of about to go home that day, and he came round to see me, and he sort of medication I got to take and whatever, and then he's kind of walk off, and then he sort of stopped, like he remembered something, and he came back, and then he sort of came down. He went, "God is with you, my friend," and
wow.
And I was like, didn't think much of it at the time, and it was only till a few months later when I actually came into recovery, sitting there thinking about that, thinking, God, what did he see?
Yeah, you must have been.
What did he see? So and I come out of there then, and I went home, and home wasn't a good place to be, and my mum saw that, and she offered me to come to her place, and I went to her place, and she's sort of looking after me, and while there, it's like the obsession started to leave me.
Oh, wonderful!
And I was, I was on quite a lot of other medication, methadone and all that, but the sort of obsession for the street drugs started to leave me, and I was just getting by on the methadone. You go to the methadone clinic every day. You have to go and pick up your script then, and and then walking away from the other people where I normally used with them all the time. So that was quite strange. And
they must have gone, Tony, what's going on?
Yeah,
Can you come in with us?
And they, and I was started going the other way, and I didn't realise anything was happening really.
Yeah,
it was just starting to leave me naturally. It wasn't as if I was trying, and something was going on internally, and so you come up to Christmas, just a few days after Christmas, I think I had my last hit of heroin, and that unbeknownst to me, that was my last hit.
Wow.
And came into the January, and I just didn't fancy sort of street using anymore. And I went to the methadone clinic, and
Did that help, the methadone? Because some people end up with a double habit.
Yeah, I had a double habit.
Yeah.
So not really. No. It's handy sometimes, but it doesn't really, because you just end up using on top. But so I went to the methadone people, and I said, I want to start coming off now. Just had this thing that I wanted to start coming off.
Yeah.
And I remember the woman, my key worker up there, and she said, "Oh no, Tony, that's not a good idea. That's, people like you don't do well off your medication.
Really?
And so I really didn't. I mean, it didn't surprise me that she felt like that, but she's seen me in some proper states over the years. And but anyway, I decided to, and I started to reduce my dose. And later on that month, in the January, sort of middle of January, I walked into an anonymous fellowship, different one to the one I first got in. And there's I saw a woman there that night. Really had a big effect on me. And
was she sharing her story?
Well, it was just the way she looked. So I'd known her when I was out there, and she was a bit older than me. And I mean, you very rarely see a person like that who's used like that and got all the scars and everything else, and they're still alive.
Yeah.
So
she's probably...
Yeah, she was, she was the epitome of, and yet here she was, 2 years clean and sober.
Wow.
And it wasn't just the 2 years. It was just she was a completely different character. Before she was scatty and she was mad, and she was whatever. And she's really normal. She's really carrying herself really well, and she's she's really
looking after herself.
Yeah,
but
her mind
nicely.
seems really nice, really normal.
Wow.
And that's and it really inspired me.
Yeah, you thought, I want some of that.
Yeah, because I had it in my mind that I was too far gone.
Yeah.
I was too old now. Was too far gone. I was too scarred. Too this. And yet here was someone who was a bit more than that, and they're
just doing great. Yeah.
They've changed. She's still clean today.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, and and so that and I came back the next day, and hope grew. And
how many years ago was that you got clean now?
So it's 18.
18 years.
18.
Wow, mate.
So
shake your head. That's impressive to come from that, and and your big book experience the first time through. Did you find it hard going? Did you find it easy? Because a lot of people out there.
So I did the first time when I first came in the first time, and I went out again. But this time, I sort of, what I'd prayed for.
Yeah.
That absolute willingness, that absolute desire, it sort of started to take hold of me.
Wow.
And
having the faith, probably.
Yes. And in that time, and the time it took me to get clean of all the methadone and that, so my first clean day, my first proper clean day was February the 12th, 2007. It was my first day without anything. And then a couple of weeks after that, I got my sponsor. It was completely different to me, and but he had a brilliant understanding of this, the big book,
the steps,
and the 12-step, and not only that 12-step way of life.
Yeah,
and that's what he said to me. The first time, this is a way of life.
Yeah,
we adopt this way of life until it becomes a way of life. And that was and I started.
And so after 18 years of living the life, and obviously you probably sponsor people, and
yeah.
and now you've written a book.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? It's a little.
So the book's called Think What You Like.
Okay.
And that's, clues in the title.
Yeah, think what you like, yeah.
Or we can think what we like, but why don't we?
Oh, okay. Interesting.
We got free will.
Yeah.
We can think what we like.
Yeah.
Our thoughts produce our feelings.
Yeah.
We can, if you
choose to be happy or choose to be sad.
Yes.
So we're in control.
Yes. Well, we've got self-will.
Yeah.
Not that we can use it much sometimes, but we've got self-will. And so the book was about 10 years in the making.
What inspired you to write a book?
So, like I say, it was about 10 years in the making, and just the idea.
Yeah.
Didn't really do anything about it, and then lockdown came, and I started to sit down and write a bit, and I found I really liked to write. Really enjoyed to write.
Yeah.
And I wasn't too bad at it.
Yeah.
And my sister's an author.
Oh, wow.
So she's got she's got 30 books out.
Jeez.
And she's got a publishing, So and she said, "Well, write it, and I'll help you."
Yeah, yeah.
And then about 6 months ago, I seriously sat down. I thought, I'm nearly 62 now.
Wow. In good shape, considering what you've been through.
Yeah. So and I sort of lived this way, and I live it. And like I say, I'm in good shape, and I sort of got a lot to say, and a lot to a lot of experience and whatever. And so I started putting it all down, and it took me about 6 months, and now it's it's gone to the final edit today.
Wow.
And it will be out in so probably the last week of April.
Jeez. Well, we'll put a link to it on the podcast, because this will be out, around about then. Yeah. And what does it cover?
So it covers my early story.
Yeah.
Like I've just.
So it's a personal story as well.
Personal story. So it's my personal story.
Yeah.
The ideas I've developed when I was younger, and that took me through, that being full of fear, and going into addiction, through addiction a bit, and then coming out, and then finding the 12 steps. And so, but at the same time, because I found the 12-step thing, and then around about the same time, there was I don't know if you remember, a book came out, and it's called The Secret.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, and it's about, it took the world by storm.
Yeah.
And it's all about the law of attraction.
Okay.
So there are laws that govern, life on this, our lives. And anyway, 3 months in, or 3 or 4 months in, I found that book, and I had more of an experience with that book than I probably did with the big book.
Wow. Huh.
And
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah, but and that was back then.
Is it a recovery-based book?
No,
or?
No.
Just
wow. It's all about and it's about the law of attraction.
Life, yeah.
Yes, and how we attract things into our lives, and and the sort of general rule is that like attracts like.
Yeah.
But on every level.
Huh. Wow. Interesting.
And there's some great, he sort of draws on a lot of knowledge from different people, from a lot of teachers, sort of old and new, and that's what I sort of studied that book, and I sort of came alive again.
Yeah.
And I started to study all the teachers all the old sort of teachers, and there's a from around the turn of the century, there was they were called New Thought teachers.
Oh, right.
And they were sort of, and they knew about, and some of it's like kind of biblical and stuff like that, but they knew how to break it down, if you like.
Yeah, into digestible chunks. Kind of.
They sort of knew how to break it down, and there was and it's talked about like laws, spiritual laws.
Oh, wow.
And once you sort of start to understand these laws, you get a better understanding of life and how and what you can do, and and how you can use them.
Wow.
And that's what I started to do.
Yeah.
And Yeah, and my life changed as a result of that.
Yeah.
My thinking got better.
Jeez.
And there was a quote in the book, The Secret. There was a quote by Einstein.
Yeah.
Or a question. He posed a question. Do you think this world we live in, or universe we live in, is hostile or friendly? And thinking about that, at the time I thought it was hostile.
Yeah.
I thought, and I had done from when I was a kid.
Was that your mind state?
Yes. I remember being 17.
Yeah.
We're just going to get sentenced to prison. We're all in a holding cell, about 12 of us, and some fellow, and he's going to get quite a lump.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh well, lad," he said, "life's a bitch, and then you die."
Wow, that's positive.
But it really made me laugh.
Yeah.
Because that's what I thought of life.
Yeah.
Life's a bitch, and then you go, and
or if you're unlucky, you marry one.
Yeah. But that was my attitude towards life.
That was almost your ethos, yeah.
Yes, and I sort of took that through life,
Wow.
and yet he was, and Einstein knew that however you answered that question would determine your path in life.
Wow, I never thought of that.
So your thoughts, your ideas are going to determine
shape
that
your
path.
direction, aren't they?
It's going to shape that path. So if you think life's a bitch, that's what you're going to see. That's all you're going to see.
So it's actually quite important to have positive people around you.
Yes,
isn't
definitely.
Because if you've got negative people,
and that's the thing. If think, I had a thing. Think well, feel good.
Jamie's got a saying. He says, "Stay away from negative people. They have a problem for every solution."
Yes.
And I thought that is so true.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes.
You can come up with, the person who invented the wheel. Someone will go, it's not going to work.
Yeah,
Forget it, mate.
Yeah. And that's what I've done. Over the course of years, I think now to think well is a skill.
Yeah,
it really is in this day and age.
So how would you define thinking well then?
So, thinking of the good and only the good.
Yeah.
And so what I've learned through all those books, and this is what I share in my book and all that, is that our thoughts produce our feelings. So when you absolutely know that, right, it's how do you want to feel? Because it's down to your thoughts.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. I love stuff like that.
So it's down to your thoughts. And then I found out there's 3 ways to get a good feeling. So one is you can think something good, and the brain's like electrical in nature, and that will ping the brain. The brain will secrete chemicals, feel-good chemicals. Your nervous system, which is there, will pick up the chemicals, and that's how it's a good feeling. Huh. It will produce so it produced good chemicals.
Yeah.
And then the nervous system will pick it up, and that's how you define if it's a good feeling.
Wow.
Yeah. And if it's an unpleasant one, if you've got an unpleasant thought or a spiteful thought or whatever, then it will produce a similar chemical. A negative, a negative chemical, and you'll.
Yeah. It's so true, because if you even if you see an advert for Burger King on telly, all of a sudden your tummy's rumbling. Yes. And you think it's psychosomatic.
Yes.
It is. So being able to control your, how you feel. I read something once somewhere, and it said, humans can only feel one emotion at a time. So you're either happy or you're sad or you're in the middle.
Yeah, 2 things can't exist at the same point.
Yeah, so if you're really sad or really angry, just make yourself happy, and it pushes the anger away. Yes. And when I tried this a few times, it blew me away.
Yes. Thought, you think your feelings. Yeah. So your brain is electrical in nature, and your feelings, your emotions, are magnetic in nature.
Wow.
So what you feel is what you're going to draw.
Huh.
So if you're going around feeling, don't like this, don't like that, that's what you're going to draw. That's going to be your experience.
Yeah, 100%. Because you could go to see a film with 3 people, and one of them's pissed off with their wife or whatever. Oh, shit film. Yes. Knew the plot. It was going to happen. Blah. Yes. But if that guy on a good day, brilliant film. I loved it. Special effects are amazing. Yes. So the quality of your mind state dictates the quality of your ride, doesn't it?
And there's 3 ways. So when you know that, then there's 3 ways to get a good feeling. Huh. So one is a good thought. Good thought will produce a good feeling. 2 is to imagine something good.
Yeah.
Same thing. You imagine something good, you get a good feeling.
Yeah.
It pings the brain and the chemicals release.
Wow.
And the third way is to take a good action.
And do a good deed.
Do a good deed.
Love it.
And then you get from that, again.
I've got to read your book, mate. This is some good stuff there. I love it. I love it.
So, so there's 3 ways to get and that's the thing then, it's when you know that, when you absolutely know that.
Yeah, when you understand it, you can actually.
Yeah, and then you can, it's up to you then. How do you want to feel?
Wow.
And then you can stop yourself. And
and if your mind is starting to go off onto a negative one, someone's nicked your car parking space, you can just think, just let it go, mate.
Or if you can't do it with your mind, because your mind sort of goes on a roll sometimes, and one thought will and that's like the law of attraction. So one thought will attract another like thought, will attract another like thought. And so it'll go on a roll.
Snowball.
So like a kind of snowball. So what you can do in those times is to get out of that. Is to take an action. And then by taking the action, you can then produce a good feeling from the action, and that will break the cycle.
Makes perfect sense. Because, in recovery, they say if you're sometimes having a bad experience, call someone.
Turn your thoughts to someone else.
Call someone else. How are you doing,
breaks
mate?
the cycle.
And then all of a sudden...
breaks the cycle.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
very interesting. Tony, I could chat to you all night long, but... I appreciate you coming down.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And we'll put some links to your book as well.
Fantastic, yes.
I'm going to come around and give you a hug. That's how we end the show.
Yeah.
But thank you kindly, mate. There's never a graceful way to do this.
No.
Cheers, pal. Nice one. Just give us a...